The sun dipped low over the city, casting a golden hue over the rundown streets of a neighborhood ruled by fear and shadows. Broken windows and graffiti-covered walls spoke of forgotten dreams and lives lived on the edge. At the heart of this urban sprawl was Marcus, the unchallenged leader of the Iron Vultures gang. Hardened by years of survival and betrayal, Marcus had earned his reputation as a man no one crossed. His crew feared him, the locals avoided him, and Marcus preferred it that way. On the outskirts of this territory, tucked away in a dilapidated house, lived John, a Vietnam veteran haunted by ghosts he couldn't shake. His home was a reflection of his soul, cracked, cluttered, and isolated. Every creak of the floorboards echoed the silence of a man who had spent too long in his own company. His days were spent tending to a small vegetable garden, a fragile attempt at normalcy, and his nights wrestling with memories of war. One evening, a scruffy dog wandered into the neighborhood. Its coat was patchy, its ribs visible through its thin frame. It darted nervously between alleys, sniffing at trash cans for scraps. The locals ignored it. Stray dogs were a dime a dozen in these parts. But this one had an uncanny way of lingering near people, as if searching for something it couldn't name. Marcus first noticed the dog while sitting outside the gang's hideout, a rundown warehouse at the corner of the 8th and Maple. The dog sat a few feet away, staring at him with piercing eyes. Marcus tossed a half-eaten sandwich in its direction, muttering, "You're braver than most," as the dog cautiously edged closer. Over the next few days, the dog became a fixture around the hideout, earning the nickname Scrap from the gang. John's first meeting with the dog came on a particularly bad night. The sound of distant gunfire had pulled him from a restless sleep. He stepped outside to clear his head, and there it was, sitting by his garden, sniffing at the wilted plants. John froze, expecting the dog to bolt, but it didn't. Instead, it wagged its tail tentatively, as if testing his reaction. "Hungry?" John muttered, his voice hoarse from disuse. He disappeared into his house and returned with a piece of bread. The dog devoured it, then sat back on its haunches, watching him with eyes that seemed to hold a strange wisdom. For the first time in years, John smiled. Scrap became a bridge between two worlds. It spent its mornings with Marcus, lounging near the gang's hideout, and its evenings with John, lying by his feet as he read or stared into space. The dog's dual loyalty didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, Marcus saw the dog trotting down the street, a scrap of cloth tied loosely around its neck like a makeshift collar. Curious, he followed it and was surprised to find it sitting by John's porch. The sight of the grizzled veteran petting the dog sparked something in Marcus, a mixture of irritation and intrigue. The next day, Marcus decided to confront John. The knock on John's door was firm and deliberate. When John opened it, he was met with Marcus's imposing frame and the glint of suspicion in his eyes. "That your dog?" Marcus asked, nodding towards Scrap, who was lying contentedly by John's chair. "Doesn't belong to anyone," John replied coolly. "It just shows up." "Well, it's been spending a lot of time at my place, too. You feeding it?" "Sometimes." "That why it likes you so much?" Marcus's tone was sharp, almost accusatory. John didn't flinch. "Maybe it's just smarter than it looks." The two men locked eyes, tension crackling in the air. Scrap, sensing the unease, whined softly and looked back and forth between them. Marcus broke the silence. "You keep it out of trouble. This neighborhood isn't kind to strays." "Neither are you," John shot back before closing the door. Despite the animosity, the encounter left an impression on both men. Marcus couldn't shake the image of the solitary veteran and the quiet strength in his words. John, meanwhile, found himself thinking about Marcus, not as a gang leader, but as a young man who, beneath his hardened exterior, seemed burdened by something deeper. And in the middle of it all was Scrap, the unifying thread that neither man fully understood but couldn't ignore. The pieces were in motion. Two lives, shaped by pain and isolation, were on a collision course set in motion by a stray dog who saw something in both of them they couldn't see in themselves. As the neighborhood held its breath, the seeds of an unlikely bond began to take root. It started with a grocery run. John rarely ventured far from home, but his garden had yielded little, and he needed supplies. He walked with Scrap at his side, the dog now a constant companion. As John reached the local market, the sound of raised voices caught his attention. Across the street, Marcus and a few of his gang members were in a heated exchange with a shopkeeper. The gang demanded protection money. The shopkeeper, emboldened by recent community efforts to stand up to crime, refused. "Listen, old man," Marcus growled, his patience thinning. "You pay now, or you'll wish you had." John's voice cut through the tension like a knife. What a big man, threatening a guy just trying to make a living. The gang turned as one, their eyes narrowing at the sight of John standing defiantly with Scrap at his side. Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "You again?" Marcus said, his tone laced with irritation. "You've got a habit of sticking your nose where it doesn't belong." "Maybe your nose shouldn't be in his wallet," John shot back, his tone as sharp as his glare. For a moment, no one moved. The gang expected Marcus to retaliate, but instead, he laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "You've got guts, old man. Stupid guts, but guts." "Call it what you want," John replied evenly. "But I've seen men like you before, and I'm not impressed." Marcus leaned closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Keep testing me, and you'll find out why people don't cross the Iron Vultures." Before John could respond, Scrap let out a low growl, stepping protectively in front of him. The tension shattered as a passing police car slowed, its presence forcing the gang to back off. Marcus locked eyes with John one last time before signaling his crew to leave. "This isn't over," Marcus warned, disappearing into the shadows. Later that night, Scrap didn't return home. John called for the dog until his voice grew hoarse, but the streets remained silent. Worry gnawed at him, and he had a sinking feeling that Marcus and his gang were involved. The next morning, John's suspicions were confirmed. He found a note pinned to his fence with a knife. "You want your dog back? Come find me." Fueled by equal parts anger and determination, John set off toward the gang's hideout. John arrived at the warehouse, his presence drawing the attention of several gang members lounging outside. They exchanged amused glances before letting him through, eager to see the show. Inside, Marcus sat in a battered leather chair, Scrap at his feet. The dog's ears perked up at the sight of John, but Marcus held the leash firmly. "Well, look who's here," Marcus said, leaning forward. "Didn't think you'd actually show." "Let him go," John demanded, his voice steady despite the odds stacked against him. Marcus smirked. "Funny. You walk in here with no backup, no plan, and you think you're in a position to make demands?" "I didn't come here to fight," John replied. "I came here to settle this. What do you want?" The gang members chuckled, but Marcus raised a hand to silence them. His expression shifted as if the question had caught him off guard. "What do I want?" Marcus repeated, leaning back in his chair. For a moment, his guard slipped, revealing a flicker of something. Uncertainty, maybe even regret. "I want respect. I want people to stop treating me like trash just because I came from it." John studied him, the pieces falling into place. "Respect isn't fear, kid. It's earned, and you're going about it the wrong way." The room fell silent. Scrap whined softly, pulling at the leash as if sensing the fragile truce. Marcus's jaw tightened, his defensive walls slamming back into place. "You don't know anything about me." "I know more than you think," John said quietly. "I've seen war. I've seen what it does to men who think power is the only thing that matters. It destroys them." Marcus stood abruptly, his hands balled into fists. "Get out." "Not without the dog," John replied, stepping closer. The gang bristled, but Marcus waved them off. With a frustrated growl, he released Scrap's leash. The dog bolted to John, wagging its tail wildly. "Next time," Marcus said, his voice cold, "you won't walk out so easily." Days passed, and though the confrontation had ended, something lingered in Marcus's mind. John's words gnawed at him, striking chords he hadn't realized were there. One night, Marcus found himself wandering near John's house. He stayed in the shadows, watching as John sat on the porch with Scrap. The pair bathed in soft moonlight. The scene stirred something buried deep within Marcus, a longing for peace, for connection. Without realizing it, he muttered, "What the hell am I doing?" "Good question," John's voice called out, startling him. The veteran hadn't missed Marcus's presence, and he gestured to the porch. "You want to talk, or are you just going to lurk?" Marcus hesitated but eventually stepped forward. He didn't sit, keeping his distance, but for the first time in years, he talked. About his past, about the pain he carried, and about the choices that had led him to this point. John listened without judgment, and when Marcus finished, he simply said, "You're not beyond saving, kid. No one is." The conversation marked the beginning of a fragile understanding. Over the next few weeks, scrap became the bridge that connected them. One night, John made an offer. "You want to learn what real respect looks like? Work with me. Help me clean up this neighborhood." Marcus laughed bitterly. "And do what? Start a garden?" "Maybe," John replied. "Or maybe you'll find something worth fighting for." The challenge hung in the air, daring Marcus to rise to it. Marcus spent days mulling over John's words. Against his instincts, he returned to John's house the following week. The gang leader wore his bravado like armor, but John saw past it. The veteran handed Marcus a spade without a word and motioned toward the overgrown plot in his yard. "Prove you've got what it takes to rebuild instead of destroy," John said simply. Marcus scoffed but took the spade. It started as a test of endurance, but over hours and then days, it became something more. Each strike of the spade chipped away at Marcus's anger and guilt. He began helping John with small tasks around the neighborhood, slowly earning nods of acknowledgement from wary residents. Word spread that Marcus was spending time with John. The gang took notice, and their loyalty wavered. To them, Marcus's alliance with John was a betrayal. One by one, his lieutenants began to question his leadership. Tensions boiled over when Diesel, his second in command, confronted him. "You're throwing everything away for some old man in a mutt?" Diesel snarled. "Maybe I'm tired of throwing everything away," Marcus shot back. The two came to blows, and the gang fractured. Diesel stormed off with half the members, swearing revenge. Days later, chaos erupted. Diesel and his faction set fire to an abandoned building near the neighborhood, a warning and a declaration of war. The blaze threatened to spread to nearby homes, and the residents scrambled to evacuate. John and Marcus were among the first on the scene. As flames roared, John barked orders like he was back in the field. Marcus hesitated, but John's unyielding calm pushed him into action. "You want respect? Earn it now," John growled. Marcus snapped into motion, organizing a bucket brigade and breaking into a house to rescue a trapped family. His gang watched from the shadows, torn between loyalty to Diesel and the undeniable bravery Marcus was showing. As dawn broke and the fire smoldered out, Marcus confronted Diesel in a nearby alley. The remaining gang members stood as spectators, unsure of where to pledge their loyalty. "You've burned enough bridges," Marcus said, his voice steady. "This ends now." Diesel sneered, pulling a knife. "You think you can lead? You're soft. You're nothing without fear." The two clashed in a brutal fight. Marcus fought with raw determination, fueled by his desire to leave behind the violence that had defined him. He disarmed Diesel and pinned him against a wall. "This is over," Marcus said, throwing the knife aside. "You want to keep destroying everything, fine, but you do it without me, without this gang." The members murmured among themselves. Slowly they began to step away from Diesel, their loyalty shifting to Marcus. The fire had damaged more than just buildings. It had exposed the cracks in the gang's foundation. Marcus declared the Iron Vultures disbanded. With John's guidance, he rallied the former members to rebuild the community instead of tearing it apart. They worked alongside the residents to repair the fire damage. Scrap became a mascot for their efforts, a symbol of second chances. Weeks later, John and Marcus stood side by side, surveying a community transformed. For the first time, Marcus felt pride, not in fear, but in what he had helped create. The once hostile neighborhood now welcomed him with cautious smiles. "You've done good, kid," John said, clapping him on the shoulder. Marcus smiled faintly. "I had a good teacher." As Scrap wagged his tail, bounding between them, the two men shared a rare moment of peace. Their unlikely bond had not only changed their lives, but it also reshaped a broken community.